Let's talk herd. Yeah, I feel like that moment when it's like a life moment, but I suppose it happens all the time as well in the relationship when you sort of come up against that choice, whether you're pushing or sending the horse away or resisting in some way, and then there's just something in you that is able to release that need to do that. And I don't know if it's connected with fear, the fact that they're a big animal and they're powerful, and a kind of sort of an innate survival instinct that we have, but it's something shifts and you just feel like you can allow them to come in and you can allow the time. And there's just because I had a similar moment with a horse a long time ago when we it was the first time Monty Roberts had come to Britain, and we saw him at Gleneagles in Scotland, and we were sort of quite impressed by it at the time because he had these really fast results, and we were very much in the training mindset at that time. And so we started doing this join up with all the horses. And the one I was closest to, I would say at the time, a gelding I'd had him from when he was quite young, and we were really, we were really bonded. And so when I started to do that with him, at a certain point, he just stopped. First of all, he tried to jump out because we'd constructed a kind of round pen out of our arena. So he tried to escape, and then he turned around and sounds very similar to Dusty. He just said, "No, like what are you doing?" Like, it was just like something rose up in him, this resistance, which was almost like a mirror to my whatever it was in me that needed to control him in that way. And it was such a powerful learning experience to have him say, just like with Dusty, just to make him just get through to me. And I think that was the beginning of a series. I mean, that was quite a long time before I made bigger changes to do with riding and things. But it just starts that process, doesn't it? Of, like you say, you don't throw everything away, but you learn. Or you don't learn, but you just become something new. Mm-hmm. And it's less about the result and more about just what is. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's so amazing to hear, because I think, a lot of people have experienced that. I think that transformative is, I think horses, I think really the natural horsemanship approach is more akin to, and this is just my personal opinion, but it's more akin to how a predator would behave with their prey. And horses, they know that. And I think at a certain point, they're trying to get us to realize that we just don't need to carry on like that. What would you say about that now? I mean, have you stepped away from that completely, or are you still kind of connected with that approach?
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because in hearing what you had shared, I think for me, I think I've stepped away from, I think, kind of subscribing or following any like particular philosophy or methodology in that being like the soul pathway. I'm curious about about pieces. But again, I think for me and where Dusty and I are in our relationship, and even in holding and creating space for other people to explore, you know, what it's really coming down to right now is just is the relationship piece. And it's like, what do I, and to speak on your point about, you know, gosh, getting curious about like, why did I think I needed to come in there? Like what was about, you know, using those particular tools and working, you know, kind of in those parameters of like working with the horse at liberty, you know, in a round pen or an arena, that was somehow going to tell me about the relationship. The interesting thing is I feel that kind of where using some of those tools led me, and this was the big exclamation point that I think came from Dusty when he was like, no. And it looked to me like, wow, he's just kind of waiting me out here. And he's not going to run out of energy anytime soon because he's been very masterful in conserving his energy. I'm the one that's been hopping around and flailing the carrot stick around and trying to get the energy up and prancing around the round pen. And sure enough, he was right. I was the one that collapsed in the center of the round pen, but I find it really interesting and curious that, you know, it's like, wow, like what was I going after there? And I feel like, and going back to what I touched on, you know, I think when, you know, when I was younger, there was this indescribable sense of, freedom. And for me, I know everyone has and I think this is what's very interesting about language, is that there's certainly written definitions of words. But where I get very excited about language is what type of feeling does a particular word produce. And so for me, when I use a word like freedom, there is this very embodied sense of spaciousness and completeness that I experience in my body. And being around horses from a very young age, I always experienced a sense of freedom, which again, for me, was like this spaciousness and this completeness that I was feeling in my body. When in partnership with a horse, you know, in the wide array of a spectrum of things that, you know, can be a partnership and be a relationship, whether it's simply, you know, sharing space together, or if it's in a working or riding relationship, or a, you know, relationship of, you know, asking a horse to move in a circle around you, or to join up, or, you know, come into you or follow you when you walk away, or whatever it is. I feel like there's something about a connection there that has a potential for me to kind of elicit that sense of freedom. But what I've been learning, and what the horses have been teaching me, is that, and I mean, I'm going to say something that I feel is super obvious, but I'm not saying this from like a single layer. I think there's layers to things. And as we continue to build awareness, we just get deeper and deeper and deeper into the layers of the same things over and over and over again. So what the horses have been teaching me is just this depth of relationship. And so much of that circles back to the intention conversation that we had. But how is this relationship reciprocal? You know, how does, you know, how does the horse receive what they need to receive? And if I'm just the one that's experiencing the freedom that I'm getting through making a connection and having, you know, another being respond to me, in a way that, you know, I'm asking, and that may feel really good to me, But then again, as I get more curious, it's like, does it? It may
Yeah,
feel good to a
yeah,
certain level and a certain layer, but as you know, I know as my own, and speaking to my own experiences, my own awareness has grown, and coming back into this intuitive invitation that I feel that the horses, you know, hold for us, is kind of getting back into that felt sense, that felt intuitive
yeah,
sense, you know, that we do have as humans, and that horses, I mean, wow, they are so amplified in that intuitive sense. But you know, if I'm following that intuitive sense, do I feel that there's a congruency between this freedom that I may be feeling, and this wholeness that I
mm,
may be feeling, and having this interaction or relationship with a horse? But is it reciprocal? You know, how's the horse
yeah,
feeling? Um, and I don't want, and I think what I realized is I don't want to use a tool or methodology in the moment that doesn't feel like we are having a reciprocal kind of symbiotic, co-beneficial experience together.
mm,
Um, Now, if I go
yeah,
and pull from, you know, natural horsemanship tools, and, you know, I send an invitation out to Dusty and say, you know, hey, here's the thing. I'm using the tool. I'm doing the thing. Are you interested? And all of a sudden he elicits a response and is like, you know, and his elicited response is yes, like, let's do this. Let's be in conversation with this.
mm,
And, you know, let's go in circles, and let's, you know, let's at Liberty walk over some poles in the arena, because, you know, it's good exercise for both of us, or, you know,
yeah,
whatever it is we're doing, or maybe going for a walk, you know, going for a walk down, you know, down a trail. Um, then I think it's the mutually beneficial piece is really important.
yeah,
And I think it brings up a term that I've been using a lot, and that I feel has been a very important term in my relationship with Dusty, is co-leadership.
yeah, yeah,
Um, you know, are we using, or am I using these tools in a space that is conducive of co-leadership?
yeah,
Um, where I'm not just the one that's giving out feedback and information and expecting, you know, my horse partner to receive it, but what information is my horse partner giving back? And in the trusted space of co-leadership, you know, what's my responsibility for listening to and receiving that information, and making any type of adjustments
yeah,
that are needed.
yeah. I love that whole aspect. I would say I've become kind of obsessed with that reciprocity from the horses, and like really understanding if it's authentic or if it's some kind of sense of obligation, or because I would say my horses have gone through a kind of unwinding process where they would, I'm not sure they all started at this place, but some of them needed to remember that they could actually have a choice. And then, and then they would maybe, purposefully say no as a kind of defense mechanism or as a test, like not so much I don't really like the word test, but just so that they knew, they could trust that they would be listened to. And then after that, becoming more curious, like rediscovering the curiosity that I think they have naturally. And then there is still, I think, with some of the ones who've had a more conventional life, there is this obligation that they sometimes feel that they want to please you, or they want to, they're going to accept. And I think for me personally, I've become very sensitive just because I feel like that's our journey. to that as well. Like, I don't even really want that. I want it to be absolutely 100% because they take joy in it and what we do together. So yeah, so I love talking about that and all the ramifications and the different because it's so, I mean, it's kind of easy to say, isn't it? You will know this, that it's easy to say, let's make it like that, but then you have to interpret what they're saying to you. You have to be able to hear it, and you have to be able to understand what they really mean. And so where would you say you're at with that? Like, how can you know what Dusty wants to do, or whether he's doing it to please you, or have you gone through a process with him, would you say?
Oh, yes. I love that question. And I think for me, I think that the question and the answer holds a very vulnerable space, because it invites me to be real and to be truthful and to be willing to let go of a perfect answer or a perfect solution. And being right. That's it. I needed to say those other things to get to boil down to that one. I think I think it's a vulnerability for me of letting go of the need to be right.
Yes.
And to know that as I am in a space where I am asking for a relationship with another being that is non-human, that there is a dynamic to that relationship that is just naturally going to be different, because we don't communicate the same way. We may have similar parts, but as at the end of the day, I'm still going to be a human. And Dusty's going to be a horse. So I feel that there's a responsibility that I am invited to take as the human, especially because he is in a situation where, he is in a domesticated situation, that is, very, it's dependent on human decisions, human feedback, things like that to maintenance that. But, as I step in and, again, kind of coming back to the piece that we said, I feel that if I at any point said, I'm done with self-growth and awareness, and I stop here, I get off that train, I just want to be done, or I just want to have a particular way, or I want to have an easy button, or I want to be able to follow the same pattern every time and do the same thing every time. If I get myself into that situation, I'm basically saying, like, for me, that translates to the end of any type of co-leadership relationship, because then that becomes all about me, and it doesn't become about Dusty anymore. There's, for me, that type of relationship, if I were to kind of say, okay, it stops here. I want the easy button. I want the easy way. This intuitive stuff and this awareness stuff and this continued growth stuff, it does take energy, and it does take time, and it does take, mistakes. And I think with that, it takes grace of being willing to kind of be with yourself, with grace and with compassion along the way, knowing that, I know I'm not going to get it right all the time. I mean, I look back at, and we've had a very short period of time of our relationship, just a couple years up to this point. But I look back and I thought, gosh, man, there are some things that I feel like I kind of already screwed up. And when I look back to the horse, and specifically in this case, Dusty, he's always there waiting.
Yeah.
And, you know, so, and I think it just comes back to that, what feels congruent in the moment. And being willing to be with, because I think you specifically asked, like, how do you navigate, you know, you know, how do you navigate that relationship with the horse in making those decisions? And, you know, I feel like receiving information from them of like, how do you know what is eliciting joy and what is just, you know, kind of, you know, this aspect, you know, where a horse may present in a way of like, I want to please you. You know, it's like, well, where's pleasing and what feels like joy? And I feel like for me, that's continuing to recommit to my own self growth and self-awareness, because that brings me all the time deeper and deeper into the layers of the intuitive piece. And when I know that I can be in the intuitive part of myself, and when I can be as authentically and as whole as I can in myself in any given moment, I have a much better chance of being able to kind of put my feelers out there, just like the horses are doing all the time, so masterfully in their environment, and just feeling like, what am I feeling from Dusty? And trusting that, you know, does he want me in close? Does he want me further away? And, yeah, I mean, it does kind of slow the process down, significantly, especially it was, us humans, we love our agendas. But, but if I'm going, you know, it's like, and then it's like, am I going after the agenda? Is that what's really going to bring me that sensation that I had as a child around horses? Is completing the agenda exactly how it's mapped out on the paper, or what I think, you know, we need to do today? Do we really need to go for that, you know, 2-mile walk together? I mean, I can think of so many things that's lovely about, you know, taking a walk in the woods with a horse partner. But does that need to happen today? And is that agenda going to elicit for me that sense of freedom and wholeness and just kind of completeness and congruency with the moment that I experienced with horses from so long ago? And in that co-leadership and co-partnership piece, you know, what am I feeling from Dusty? You know, is he finding, I love that you use the word joy, you know, is Dusty experiencing joy? Is he feeling his whole best self in that moment? And I feel like for me, the best tool that I have in my toolbox with that is my intuition. In this moment. So I think that's to more specifically answer your question. I think it's continually kind of coming back, getting back into my body, reconnecting with my intuition and my felt sense, you know, just as the horses use their senses, to just read the space. And I read the space to my ability. I don't read the space to be perfect. I don't read the space to be right. But I read the space the best I can in the moment, to be able to make that decision, with the intention of co-leadership. And then you try the thing that comes up, and that may be it may be saying, you know, it's been great being with you today. I'm going to go in my space and enjoy your space. Or it may be, let's try that walk together. You know, it may be standing together, or sitting together, or breathing together, or whatever it is. It may be doing something separately. And we try it, and then I feel like, well, am I getting the congruency? Am I getting the congruency not only for myself, but am I getting it for my my horse partner or the horse that I'm in company with in the moment.
Yeah.
And the answer may be yes, or it may be no. And the answer is no. It's like, well, I put the feelers out there again.
Yeah.
What's being asked? So kind of trial and error. But I think the big thing is that I continue to work on is the grace and the compassion with the getting it right. Because I know from a human perspective, I put a lot of pressure on myself. It's like, oh, let's get it right. I really want to get it right. Yeah.
It is. It's a really I think it is. It's evolving all the time. I don't know if you um experienced this in any way, but I found that I I suppose it was because of how I started down this track, which was really more in terms of the management. Like we, I suppose we started with the horses going barefoot, and then gradually we realized that because we had I suppose because we had a lot of horses, so it was slightly different situation. But at one point we realized that they were much happier to be a whole herd together. Like we stopped separating them into groups that we thought were good groups for them, and then we stopped rugging, and then we stopped, or blanketing, I think you call it in America, and then we stopped feeding them concentrates. That was like the final one. And so I found that doing all of those things, like, and just the way that their life is managed as well on their in their territory, it was almost like giving them an almost independent life. I mean, obviously we have to keep that maintained, but not in a it's not in a way that's really obvious. It's kind of independent almost of them, so they have their own life. And I felt like the more of their own life they have, the more, it's almost like the more it purified our relationship, so they don't see me as a food source. Or I mean, they know that presumably that, I'm behind it and I'm the provider of those things, and they are, like you said, they are domesticated. But there was like it was quite powerful, I felt, for the relationship, just to know that whatever we did was just about the relationship itself and nothing else. Does that resonate with you in any way, or is it different when you've got just one horse?
It really does, and I think that's what makes it challenging for me in ways right now to just have one horse that I have committed care to. The fortunate thing is that we are part of a farm and barn community here in Dusty and I are part of a farm and barn community here in North Carolina that just has a really lovely group of horses. And in the time that I spent in BC with Hillary and her herd, I mean, they are just they are simply a herd, and that is the space and how humans that come into that space interact. And it's the majority of interactions. It's a herd based space of relationship and interaction. So I think, yeah, I'm trying to figure out, I was listening to my gut here of like, which thread do I pull? I feel that that's my favorite way to be in relationship with Dusty and with horses right now,
Mm.
is just in that herd-based space. And I think there has been such profound learning that's happened.
Mm.
And I think I touched on this very briefly when we first started having this conversation, and kind of my pathway. And it wasn't until I went to the organization that was near our home here in North Carolina and started doing some volunteer work that I actually was kind of guided into the space of being in a more observational space with horses. And there were so many things that I learned in being able to observe a horse being a horse.
Yeah.
I mean, things that I just never thought possible. And that has gifted me with, I think getting into more subtle levels of, my own feeling and intuition and sensory ability. And at the same time, I feel that I'm just blown away by how I feel that it feels very honoring to the horse. And the responses that have come from different horses, it's one of my favorite things to do is just go out into the field. I rarely have a chair, but sometimes I do. Most of the time I'm just like plopping down on the ground and just sitting.
Yeah.
And I am always just in awe about just observing them. And, I think for me as a human, it's like I get curious of like what themes, how does this translate to me? And sometimes it is literally just sitting in quiet space. And other times, things come in as little highlights, and, you almost get that little quiet voice that says, notice this happening right now. Notice the very subtle and graceful boundary setting that's happening between these two horses out here in the, in the field, or notice the super high energy where, the herd just took off and everybody was running or playing, and how that dynamic shifts back into going back to grazing. And there's such beautiful relationships there that, for me and, and other people that I have, worked and shared space with, of like, wow, you can see these mirrors or parallels, in your own life. It's like, wow, sometimes it is hard for, I recognize I learn things about myself, how it's transitions are difficult for me. And I see, as horses functioning as a herd, I observe time and time again of just how easeful and how natural and how graceful transitions can be.
That's true.
And I realize and I learn, it's like, wow, I can really soften on myself there. Or I can really just acknowledge that, wow, transitions are difficult for me, as a person.